Greetings, fellow readers. This is Rambling Collector, back here with another comic book ramble for all of you today. Now, for the subject of today's video, I was actually given the challenge by my friend and fellow YouTuber, Brevins Flicks and Games, to review the first volume of the classic Batman 90s series, Batman Knightfall. Now, I had heard a lot about Batman Knightfall, for instance how the introduction of Bane, with how he had broken Batman's spine, as well as the introduction of Azrael, and of course, the showing of Tim Drake Robin. But, despite hearing of it, I had never read it before until recently. And, needless to say, I was extremely blown away. Not just by the sheer size of this comic, which is the equivalent of a massive paperback novel, but also the great story that was being told. With that said, let's get started. So to first of all give a little clarification before I dive into the highlights of this volume. This video will only cover Volume 1 of the Knightfall series, not the entire one. The fact that this graphic novel was immense, the equivalent of a compendium no less, I decided this one deserved its own video. Now, if this one does well, I will full-heartedly review volumes 2 and 3 in their own separate videos, but that depends on how well this video does. But with that being said, on to the highlights. So from what I understand, this series remains one of Batman's most popular and most well-known stories from the 90s, giving the introduction of Bane, which I was actually under the impression that Bane was just this dumb musclehead for hire, but no. The comic actually portrays Bane as a terrifying and nigh unstoppable new villain. After all, Knightfall was apparently Bane's big introduction, and he introduces himself in a great way. First of all, growing up in a prison, I'd heard about it, but seeing it in the comic form was fascinating. Seeing how prison was something he knew for his whole life, essentially rotting in this maximum security cell, which was constantly getting flooded, only to then bring in further to the prison hierarchy, bringing himself up to a higher position, training his body and mind by gathering so much knowledge to himself. Most prisoners would just use cigarettes or something else of that matter, trade in. Bane just wanted books. He wanted to learn, and he trains his body and mind continuously, hardly even needing to sleep, merely meditating for 4 hours, which makes Bane, in my opinion, a very dangerous villain by himself. It makes him a smart villain, and those kind are the most dangerous, and seeing that in the comic really highlights just how dangerous this guy actually is, that he's not just a dumb muscle-headed brute. But more than anything though, despite this, it also shows Batman in one of his weakest moments, with his body and spirit being broken. And I've got to say, Bane's master plan here to wear down Batman to the point of breaking was genius level. I mean, come on, the guy reads up to train himself to take over Gotham. Of course he's going to know how to run Batman through the gauntlet. But seeing it in action, how he breaks open Arkham Asylum, brings out a lot of Batman's greatest villains, from minor to major, from the murderous Victor Zsasz and the pyromaniac Firefly, all the way to Poison Ivy, Joker, and Scarecrow. And all of this to distract Batman and run him ragged when he is still getting over a sickness that he had just started to recover from. And more than that, apparently this story actually takes place after both Death in the Family and Killing Joke, two of the most iconic stories in the Batman mythos. So this takes place after Jason Todd is dead, and Barbara Gordon has been crippled from being Batgirl and has been turned into Oracle. That alone paints a very amazing picture there. How Batman has endured all this tragedy back to back to back. And at this point he is approaching a dark moment in his life where he believes he has to fight alone, pushing Tim Drake away despite them being partners. And I like how throughout all of this, Batman is trying to keep pushing himself further and further, driving himself to the point of physical and mental exhaustion, until at last he comes face to face with Bane in his own mansion, because apparently Bane actually figures out that Bruce Wayne is Batman. And after that, confronting him in the Wayne Manor, and then fighting him all the way down to the Batcave before breaking Batman's spine over his knee. I have to admit, despite the fact knowing that it was coming, it still shocked me completely. And seeing not only this, but the rise of Azrael, with his unique Batman armor with the gold-plated armor, the dark mask, the spiked gauntlets, but seeing Batman himself weakened at this point. Because I'm not going to lie to you guys, the latest Batman comics paint him as this unstoppable force. But seeing a weakness in Batman, seeing him broken, was a fascinating viewpoint to look at. Seeing him just a broken husk of a man being brought back from the brink. It was fascinating. But more than that, besides the great story, I also had an appreciation for the artwork, which let's talk about that for a minute. Okay, so the artwork. Now I realize this comic came out in '93, apparently, but I will say this much. Despite its age, the artwork, in my opinion, still holds up very well. I mean, look at the detail here. Look at the bright colors. The great little action sequences, the hand-drawn, rougher look to the characters. I love it. I absolutely love it. Especially the panel here on the far left, which shows an isolated page of Bane breaking Batman's spine. Yeah, that alone was an entire page. But then, of course, I gotta say this much. The Azrael panel shown here in the middle is absolutely gorgeous. That is poster-worthy, in my personal opinion. With Azrael just gliding on his back through the skylines of Gotham, with his brand new batsuit with the pointed cape, the gold armor, the gauntlets, the new Batman mask. It is just gorgeous to look at. And I gotta say, despite being a 90s comic, like 90s has something else there. I'm going to say that right now. The digital colors of the comics nowadays is beautiful in its own right with its unique artworks, but there's just something about the rougher, hand-drawn artwork that has a greatness to itself. I'm not really sure what the words to put here for. It's the nostalgia is what I would put it as, but the sheer detail put into it. You can just feel the love put into this comic and the story it is trying to tell. So that's enough about me gushing about the artwork here. Let's move on to one of my favorite segments that is now growing on me, Random Thoughts. So, random thoughts on this comic. First of all, the sheer size of it was something I did not expect, but I will say this much. While enjoyable, there were times that it could feel exhausting. And that would be my one biggest criticism of it, was that sometimes it felt a little bit exhausting to read because it was so big. But I still relatively enjoyed it, especially when it gave some spotlights to a lot of the major Batman villains, such as Two-Face, Joker, Scarecrow especially. I really like the segment where it shows Azrael as the new Batman, or as the temporary Batman, taking on Scarecrow, who wants to build himself up as a god of fear. I gotta say, that whole comic was pretty interesting. And then watching Batman knock the crap out of Joker while screaming Jason Todd's name, you know at that point Batman was about to snap. He had been pushed to his limits, and he was having none of Joker's little laughs that day. I've got to say, that was satisfying to watch Batman just knock the stuffing out of Joker whilst screaming Jason Todd's name. And now I really see it with the whole thing of Bruce becoming far more violent and ruthless with the death of Jason Todd. Now I really see the after effects of just how much losing a Robin hurt him, but more than that, an adopted son. I can definitely see how that really impacts the guy, losing anybody close to him, really. And also, Azrael makes a very interesting character, because while he was conditioned to be an assassin, we see him trying to be a hero in his own way, but he is far more aggressive, seeing the ends justify the means. That sort of mentality, which makes him far more ruthless and dangerous as a Batman. And I gotta say, Yes, his costume is cheesy, especially for the 90s, but honestly, I can see why a lot of people have appreciation for it. It's definitely a standout and unique Batman costume, which we hardly ever see a lot of those. So that the gold plating, the spiked cape, gauntlets, of course, face covering mask. It's a unique design. I love it. But also watching Tim Drake having to deal with being pushed to the sidelines constantly, both by Bruce Wayne and then Azrael, it's honestly heartbreaking to watch the guy wondering, what am I even doing here? His whole questioning himself act. But then, of course, also seeing Nightwing as well was pretty cool. Oracle, pretty much just having Batman learn that he cannot fight his battles by himself anymore. He's just one man. He can only push himself so far. Knightfall, I think, will really show the consequences of him doing that, especially with him just continuously pushing himself, thinking he has to be a one-man army. But we see how it breaks him, mentally, physically, and even spiritually. And I gotta say, this will definitely be a humbling experience for Bruce Wayne, especially since I am interested to see more of Knightfall. But like I said, I still want to see if this video does very well. If not, I'll still probably read them. Maybe I just won't review them. I'm not sure about that yet. But I will say, this was definitely a fun challenge, though. I enjoy a good challenge to the brain, especially with Batman, whom I am kind of mixed on. I understand that he's a popular character, but at the same time, I feel like there's too much of him, in my personal opinion, especially nowadays. Okay, I think I rambled on long enough. Let's move on to the score. So overall, I feel comfortable putting Batman Knightfall Volume 1 at a good solid 8 out of 10. Great artwork, great story. My main criticism was just how large this thing was. But after realizing that it was a whole event that lasted an entire year, I can understand it. But if you were not prepared to read a massive paperback volume of comics worth, especially when it comes to Batman, you will find this a bit of an exhausting read. Enjoyable, but exhausting. All in all, I'd say thank you, Brevin, for giving me the challenge to read this one. I look forward to the next one that you give me. But more than that, thank you guys so much for listening if you're here at the end of the video. I want to thank you guys so much for listening to this crazy man's ramblings once again. And if you like this comic review, and if you want to check out more of what I've talked about, feel free to click a link to the playlist that you'll see here. But if you're interested to see some of my thoughts on regular paperback novels, feel free to click the link to that playlist here as well. And if you did like this video, feel free to leave a like, comment your thoughts on it down below, and subscribe if you're interested for more. And once again, you guys, thank you so much for listening to this crazy man's ramblings. I would not have gotten as far as I have without all of you listening to my, I guess, boring little podcasts. But again, thank you so much for listening, fellow readers. Have a great day. This is Rambling Collector, signing off.